It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and we finally made it. The last weekend of 1990, December 28th, and we're going to look at the last four movies of the year that came out before Christmas and on Christmas Day. And let's go ahead and get right to it. Let's start with the first movie, and that is Alan Parker's Come See the Paradise.
You're really beautiful, Lily. Can I kiss you?
You let him kiss you just like that?
No, 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 no!
Talk to me, Mama.
Jack, listen. She's Japanese, Jack. We'll find you a nice American girl. What I can never be. Not ever. Is Japanese. But I couldn't love Lily more. You have a happiness inside you that makes you so beautiful. And in your eyes is something so perfect no one can touch it. You're just giving me a little handful of that magic. And no one and no thing is ever going to take that away from us.
Already a better love story than anything that came out of Pearl Harbor, and we'll eventually get to that one when we get to 2001, but yeah, Pearl Harbor sucks. That movie is terrible, and this movie basically shows you how you can do a romantic drama set around the events of World War II and Pearl Harbor and do it the right way. Because this is a really good movie. It's a movie that a lot of people don't really talk about all that much. It didn't do so well financially at the box office, it got decent reviews critically, but it didn't really make it a huge impact around award season. But it's a really good movie. It's a really good Dennis Quaid movie that is one of his best underrated performances here. It has a great Japanese cast all around. You've got Sab Shimono, Tamlin Tomita. You've also got who else is in here? I'm trying to see who else is in here. Cole Meany's in this. You've seen him in a bunch of movies. Just a great cast all around. And it's a really good story. It's a really good story about this American who falls in love with a Japanese woman. They get married, and unfortunately, they try to have their life together while the events of World War II are happening, and just before the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, and of course we get involved in the World War II. And it is an interesting story. It's a very good story. It's a very good character piece, with these great characters that you really associate yourself with, you get emotionally connected to, and it never feels forced. It never feels like they're going too much for over-dramatic needs. It doesn't feel like they're doing this to do an Oscar bait type of movie. It feels very real. It feels very simplistic. And it's a really good movie. It's one that, like I said, a lot of people don't really talk about all that much. And it is one of those movies where I feel like it doesn't get as much love as it should, because it is overall a pretty solid movie. I've seen worse Oscar bait movies that have done this story so badly, and even movies where, like I said, the aforementioned Pearl Harbor, which I'm sorry I keep bringing back Pearl Harbor, but that movie just rubs me the wrong way. Again, we'll get to that when we get to 2001, but for this movie, it's a really good movie. It's a much better movie than I think a lot of people give it credit for. If you haven't seen Come See the Paradise, definitely check it out. I'd say you definitely get a much better movie than what people would tell you, for judging by what you hear from critics and from the people that have seen the movie. And yeah, it deserves a lot more credit than I think it deserves. So that's my thoughts on Come See the Paradise. Let's go ahead and move on to the next movie, and that is Woody Allen's Alice. Elise.
A woman who's never done a dishonest thing in her life finds herself falling into a love affair with a musician.
It's a little vague, Alice. Who's the woman? Who's the man? Who's the poor husband? What makes it interesting? Is it lurid? Is it sexual? Perverse?
Are you wearing the underwear I bought you?
Where does it go?
What is this? Where am I going?
So yeah, that trailer was pretty interesting. You basically have the story of Alice Tate, a mother of two, who's married for 16 years. She finds herself falling for this handsome sax player played by Joe Mantegna. Alice is played by Mia Farrow. She has a backache, so she goes to this doctor, an Oriental herbalist, who realizes that her problems are not related to her back, but in her mind and heart. And the herbs that Dr. Yang gives her gives Alice these magical powers that takes her out of this well-established rut. And it's just like that premise alone just sounds so weird on so many levels that I don't know. I mean, it's a weird premise to say the least. And Woody Allen has done weird movies like this. Like The Purple Rose of Cairo works because of how weird it is, and it works because it's a better written story. It has a lot more interesting film aspects they use, the way they shoot it, the way they have these actors working on that. Movies like that, I think, work very well. This movie, not so much. This is a movie that I think has a good idea to it, but overall, it doesn't really stick the landing. This is one of Woody Allen's movies where it's not quite as good as I think a lot of people wanted it to be. I've seen Woody Allen write better movies than this, and when you have something like this, I mean, the best movie he's ever made was very much a movie that is based in fantasy, like Midnight in Paris. It's a story. You have this writer who suddenly becomes infatuated with the city of Paris because he meets all these historical novelists and authors and classical writing people of the time, and that movie just works so much better. And it's definitely my personal favorite Woody Allen movie. This one, not so much. I think it has an interesting idea, but it doesn't stick the landing, despite a pretty good cast involved here. You got Alec Baldwin, Blythe Danner, Judy Davis, Mia Farrow, William Hurt, Joe Mantegna, Bernadette Peters, Sybil Shepherd, and unfortunately, there's just nothing there that really sticks the landing. Honestly, it's a movie that probably could have been better if there was a better script involved, but I don't know. For the most part, it was mostly a forgettable film. At least to me, it was. So that's Alice. So let's go ahead and move on to the next movie, and that is Green Card with Gerard Depardieu and Andy McDowell.
You snore, and your manners are atrocious.
You think that important? You're a snob.
You're a slob. You're overweight. You're disgusting.
You're together?
Sort of. Do you mind?
You're like an old married couple.
Are you married, George?
Not usually.
Whatever do you mean?
Oh, well, not normally.
You're getting divorced.
Yes, definitely.
From Peter Weir, the director of Dead Poets Society, comes the story of two total strangers who entered into a marriage of convenience.
I now pronounce you man and wife.
Bronte, is this true?
Yes, but it's not the way you think.
They thought they'd never have to see each other again until...
I'm with the investigation department of the INS,
The what?
the Immigration Service.
the government changed everything.
Let him move into my apartment. I can't believe you're saying that.
But if marrying a stranger doesn't shock you, then letting spend a couple of nights sleeping on the sofa, well, that shouldn't shock you either.
You don't like me, do you?
We don't have to like each other. We just have to be married.
There's been a major clampdown on illegal aliens marrying for residency status.
Let me do the talking.
I'll do the talking.
How did you two meet?
We sort of crashed into each other.
Get that story straight.
Mom, Dad.
What's going on?
This is George. The handyman.
You hereby swear that the evidence you're about to give is the truth. I'm a composer, the whole truth,
A refugee.
and nothing but the truth.
He's not a spy or something.
I'm the husband. We're together. Okay.
Touchstone Pictures presents France's most acclaimed actor, Gerard Depardieu, and America's newest film sensation, Andy McDowell, in the story of two very different people sharing one very unusual relationship.
You just have to trust your instinct.
Green Card.
So you have this movie that's the follow-up for Peter Weir after what he did with Dead Poets Society the year before. And it's a decent movie. It's not an Oscar-caliber movie. I think that's what Disney wanted to do when they put this out in late December, thinking that maybe this was going to be another Oscar contender for Peter Weir and Disney, but I don't think it's anything like that at all. It is a fine movie. I think the premise is a little too predictable. It's a little too rom-com cliche-filled, but usually when you have a movie like this that mostly depends on those romantic comedy cliches. The two actors have to have really good chemistry in order for it to really stand out on its own. And I think both Gerard Depardieu and Andy McDowell do have some good chemistry here. I think they do really have a good chemistry that you can really believe in. You could believe that this couple they married each other just so Depardieu could get a green card, but then when they have to come back together, is when the FBI gets involved. You can believe that they sort of fall back in love with each other, and then it's an interesting concept. It's a good movie overall. It doesn't really do anything new that we haven't seen done before in other romantic comedies, but it's a good movie. It's one I probably wouldn't watch over and over again, but I don't know. I thought it was alright. I think it could have been a lot better. Yeah, absolutely, but for what we got, it was perfectly fine for what it is, and accepted for that. That's what I really think about it. So that's Green Card. Now let's go ahead and move on to the biggest new release of the weekend, and that was, of course, Francis Ford Coppola's return to the Godfather saga, The Godfather Part III.
And now, Paramount Pictures presents the continuation of Francis Ford Coppola and Mario Puzo's legendary saga.
We've sold the casinos. All businesses having to do with gambling. We have no interest or investment in anything illegitimate.
Don Corleone. The Corleone family. Partners with the Pope. They may cry blasphemy.
This is business. I know you're into banks and Wall Street, but everyone knows you're the father of words like the Supreme Court. All I want to do is protect you from these guys, and your lawyers can't do that. I said we make them dead. You give me the order, I'll take care of it. I command this family, right or wrong.
You know, Michael, now that you're so respectable, I think you're more dangerous than you ever were.
Our true enemy has not yet shown his face. If every drug pusher in this room would have dropped dead, I would be the only one alive. Well, you talk for me, he can live or he can die, you understand? Will you shut up? Will you shut up?
Love me.
You're the only one left in this family with my father's strength.
I'm a Corleone.
You can save the Corleone family. I'll help you.
The ultimate story of family.
Come at me as you will.
And loyalty.
Give up my daughter.
Power. And violence.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
The Godfather Part III.
When they come, they'll come at what you love.
Yeah, sadly I can't show the full trailer, but you really need to go out and look at the full trailer for this, because it's probably one of my favorite trailers of all time, because it starts off with clips from both The Godfather and The Godfather Part II. Talks about the history between both movies and just gets you psyched to see what the next chapter of this saga is going to be. And like I said, I couldn't put the whole trailer up there, but definitely go look for it online. You can definitely look for it there. So The Godfather Part III has a notable history behind it. It's a movie that a lot of people say is the worst of the series, which really I can't really be wrong on that, because compared to the first two movies, it's definitely a lesser sequel. I don't think it's that bad, honestly. I don't hate this movie like everybody else does. Overall, I do really enjoy it. When you compare it to the other two movies, it's definitely a big letdown, but you also have to remember that this movie had a lot of problems behind the scenes. Largely, Paramount wanted to rush this out in theaters in time for a specific date, so they had Francis Ford Coppola move as fast as he can to make this movie, and unfortunately they didn't have enough time to put together the right pieces to it, which is why I think in other versions that come out after this, like the one I think he did a version a couple of years after this movie came out, and then more recently with the Godfather Coda, you get much better movies. But Yeah, overall, I think Part 3 is a really good movie. Coppola and Mario Puzo's script does manage to try to keep what made the last two movies so special and memorable, and it does work with a couple of exceptions. For one thing, I think the final scenes are a little bit of a cop-out, especially the last scene, because at the same time, it makes sense that a man who's dealt with so much death in his life by violence, he dies naturally by a heart attack. But, I mean, by far the worst thing about Godfather 3 really is, I mean, Sofia Coppola, which, yeah, she's a great director, but she really can't act to save her life. I mean, it's the one thing that really bothered me about this movie, because you think with a director like Francis Ford Coppola, you would teach your daughter how to act and not just, or to just recast the role. I think at one point they wanted Winona Ryder for this role, which, talk about a banner year for her if she would have gotten this, but nope, unfortunately we got this. But yeah, Godfather 3 really still has those great moments, like the scene where the meeting is interrupted by gunfire, although it does have some of the funniest one of the funniest out of nowhere moments where the guy is wants his coat so badly that he'd rather die than leave his coat behind. It's a ridiculous scene, but I can't help it. I laugh every time I see it. But you know, it is still one of the most well put together scenes in the film. It also has some of the best lines in the series. You know, where Al Pacino goes, "Just when I thought it was out, they pulled me back in." It's definitely the lesser of the series, no question about it. But so was Return of the Jedi for the original Star Wars trilogy. So was The Dark Knight Rises for the Batman movies. But they're still really good, solid movies. And yeah, I think with the other versions that came out after this, it definitely shows that Coppola, if he had more time to work on it at first, you probably would have had something on par with the original films. I mean, the movie did get several nominations at the Oscars the year after this, but didn't win anything. I think they just really put it in there because it's The Godfather. It's got to be in there. If it's not, then something must really be wrong with it. But it didn't do bad critically either, or financially. It did pretty well, but it just doesn't have that longevity it didn't have that same legacy that the other two movies had behind them, and that was a tall task to begin with. And just for the fact that this came out the same year as The Two Jakes, which was another sequel that they were really pushing to do very well, and that ended up failing so badly. This movie won on so many levels compared to what The Two Jakes ended up being. But yeah, like I said, if it would have helped better if Godfather 3 didn't feel rushed and Coppola had more time to work on it. But I think it is still a very good movie. It doesn't live up to the same caliber as the first two movies, but you know, Francis Ford Coppola has had a lot of good movies that people have not really talked about all that much. Even before this, he had some great stuff like One from the Heart, which was one of the movies that killed New Hollywood, but it was actually a really good movie. I just saw it recently. It's a wonderfully made movie. The visual look of that film is amazing, but you also have The Outsiders, you have The Cotton Club, Tucker, the Man in His Dream. Just these great movies that not a lot of people really gave a lot of respect to back then, but years later, they finally are getting their proper respects and becoming like having these cult followings. And Godfather 3 definitely has had that, especially with the Godfather Codex receiving a much better reception than the original version did. And yeah, like I said, nowhere near as good as the first two movies, but I still really enjoy it a lot. This series is still one of my second favorite movie of all time. I consider all three of these films together just one movie to put in my top movies list. It's my second favorite movie, only behind Bambi. And if Godfather Part 3 had been a little bit better the first time around, maybe this would have been my favorite movie of all time. But yeah, overall, I like Godfather Part 3. I do really enjoy this movie a lot. So that's my thoughts on The Godfather Part 3. So with that said, that wraps up 1990, and that wraps up another edition of Time About the Movies. And yet we're going to jump into 1991 by doing the 1990 leftovers. Not as many as last year's leftovers, the 89 leftovers. It will at least get to one episode. I have the list here of the movies that were notable, but I didn't get a chance to talk about. We have, of course, Awakenings, which actually came out is 2 weeks prior to this, but it wasn't featured on the Box Office Mojo website. We also have The Ambulance, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, A Man Called Sarge, Love at Large, Side Out, Without You I'm Nothing, and Far Out Man. So 8 movies to look at, and then after that we jump into the 91 movies. So we'll at least get one episode of 1990 leftovers, and we'll take a look at those on the next episode. So we begin a new year, 1991 next time around. So thank you for watching, and as always, if you want to see more videos like this, check out the previous episode and check out the entire playlist for 1990 on this is on the next page. And I'll see you guys for the next new episode, which will be tomorrow, as we jump into the new year, 1991. So thank you for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and until then, take care.